So, except for you and the ministers, the other officials must stay outside. The king nodded, understood, and ordered the other officials to wait outside while only the ministers entered. Inside the room, the king asked Ian and the ministers, "Did you and the people at the research institute create all of this?" Heng quickly answered, "Yes, father, and specifically, these people worked very hard." The king smiled and said, "I see, you've all done well." The king then picked up a strange tool and asked, "But what is this long rod for?" Heng explained, "That is a tool called a leveler, as the name suggests. It's used to measure balance horizontally and vertically." He added, "But this isn't the final version. If the iron ball stops exactly in the center, it means everything is perfectly balanced." The king examined the tool carefully and said, "I understand, but why is such precision necessary?" Heng explained, "For construction." Father, the king, surprised, asked, "Construction? Tell me more." Heng continued, "Yes, it's crucial for assembling astronomical instruments. The surface must be perfectly level for accurate measurements." Many people walking around the palace wondered what the commotion was about. The king nodded, "I see. So, we could use this tool when building walls for government buildings, right?" Heng, still cautious, said, "Please forgive me, father, but it's still too early to use this tool for construction." The king asked, "Why is that?" Heng responded, "This leveler is still in the experimental phase. Once it's ready for practical use, I'll submit a report." The king replied, "I understand, I'll wait for your report." Then, the king picked up a model of a ship and, intrigued, asked, "This must be a warship. Did you make a model of a battleship?" Heng answered, "Yes, father, this is a scaled model of the largest battleship." The king examined it closely and said, "But this ship looks strange. It doesn't look like an Asen ship." Heng explained, "That's because it's a Western ship. Father, the model is built to the same scale as their largest warship." The king, still holding the model in his hands, exclaimed, "What? The Westerners have already built such a gigantic ship?" Then he added, "But what about the oars?" Heng laughed and said, "That ship doesn't need oars. Father, it runs entirely on wind power." The king, now holding another model, asked, "And what about the weapons?" Heng replied, "The weapon is cannons. Father, if calculated correctly, it can carry about 80 cannons." The king was astonished. 80 cannons? Amazing, Crown Prince. Heng, delighted, said, "I will make you proud." Father, the ministers standing nearby were equally surprised. Then the king noticed a simpler model placed next to the warship and asked, "What's the doing here? Is that a bowl of noodles?" Heng laughed, "No, father, that represents an iron ship." The king and the ministers were shocked and said in unison, "An iron ship?" A few months earlier, Heng had expressed his desire to build an iron ship. At that time, the ministers had been equally surprised, asking, "An iron ship? That's impossible, even children know iron sinks in water." But Heng had responded, "It's not impossible, we just haven't figured out how yet." Everyone asked, "What do you mean by that?" The crown prince then called for the eunuch, "Bring me a bronze cup and a large basin filled with water." The eunuch agreed, "Yes, your highness," and fetched the items. Heng conducted a simple experiment to demonstrate to the officials. "Look, even iron can float on water." The ministers, intrigued, wanted to hear more. Heng explained, "Even with the same weight. If the object is solid and only touches the water with a small surface area, it will sink. But if it's hollow and the surface area in contact with the water is large enough, iron can float. That's because if we keep the mass the same but increase the volume, the density decreases." One of the ministers stroked his beard and asked, "What's density?" The Minister of Public Works, standing nearby, chimed in, "We learned about this at the Foundational Institute." He added, "So, if we use thin, strong iron sheets and attach them together, we can build an iron ship." Heng nodded, "Exactly, it's that simple." However, one of the ministers raised a concern, "But how can we join the iron sheets securely while ensuring that water doesn't seep through?" Heng, smiling innocently, replied, "That's your research task, I leave that to you." The ministers silently cried inside, wondering if they should just resign. Afterward, Heng had explained to the king why the wooden model was placed there. The Minister of Revenue respectfully said, "Your Majesty, I don't think building an iron ship will be easy." The king asked, "But do you think we can figure out the method?" Heng confidently replied, "Of course, we already know the principle, now we just need to find the method." The minister continued, "But, Crown Prince, isn't the problem that we don't know how long it will take?" King Sejong then asked, "Will I be able to see an iron ship while I'm still on the throne?" At this point, Heng wasn't sure how to respond. But he said, not only may father not see it, but I also might not see it during my reign. Shocked, the king exclaimed, what, even so, do you still believe we should continue this research, even though we don't know how much time or money it will take? Hang, filled with confidence, replied, for the future of Joseon, we must do it. Father, please trust me. The king and the ministers, taken aback by Hang's confidence, could only say, this kid has some guts. One minister commented, but everything strange that he has done so far has led to good results. The king sighed and said, all right. Keep going, but we can't just blindly invest time and money into this, you'll need to prepare and submit a detailed plan, and provide periodic progress reports. Hang, smiling, responded, yes, father. As the king examined more models, he asked, I've been wondering, what's that strange thing in the corner? Hang replied, oh, that's Heron's steamball. Father, the king, surprised, said, a steamball, it looks like this? Hang explained, it's a measuring device created by a famous Western scholar from long ago. The king then added, even if we successfully build the iron ship, there's another issue, the heavier the ship, the harder it will be to move with just sails and oars. Right, so how do we plan to make it move? The minister said, that's right, that's another problem. Hang, full of excitement, said, of course, young Shin would have thought of that already. I've also considered it, that's why I want to start a new research project with all of you ministers. He called for the eunuch, bring the device I asked the military supply department to prepare. The eunuch, obedient, replied, yes, your highness, and brought out a device that was spinning. Seeing it, the ministers were amazed, it's spinning like a wheel, and it's getting faster. Hang asked, have you ever seen how a pot lid moves when rice is cooking in the kitchen? The energy from the water and fire can even move that heavy lid. I want to call this a steam engine. The model steam engine was running, and the ministers were surprised at how fast it was spinning, like a whirlwind. The Minister of Public Works exclaimed, with just a little water and fire, it's able to spin like that. I think it's worth researching. If we can perfect it, I believe we could use it for ships. It would be very convenient and useful because we wouldn't have to wait for the wind to blow in the right direction. Nor would we need so many people to row the ship. Hang waved his hand and said, this isn't just for ships. Minister Li Zhan, confused, asked, you mean we can use it for something else too? Hang, quick to respond, said, what if we used it instead of carriages? The Minister of Public Works and Li Zhan were in disbelief when they heard that the steam engine could replace horse-drawn carriages. Scene shifts to King Taizong. Hang was presenting his invention to the king, who was deep in thought. You want to use this device to pull a cart? I don't understand, the king said. Hang asked, what part don't you understand, father? The king then expressed his concerns. To use this, we'll have to constantly supply it with water and fire, right? If that's the case, we'll need to carry a large amount of water and wood on the cart itself. Wouldn't that leave no room for cargo? Hearing this, Hang thought to himself, as expected from King Taizong, he's incredibly sharp. Outwardly, he remained calm and responded. I understand what father is worried about, but this steam engine can generate a tremendous amount of power relative to its size. It wouldn't just pull one cart, it could pull many at once. The king was still skeptical. Many carts at once? Is that even possible? Hang, smiling confidently, said, let me show you. Father, excited, he opened the door to the secret room. The king and the ministers were awestruck, exclaiming, what are all these things? Hang thought to himself, this is the ultimate goal of my 21st century passion, the model railroad. He then said, allow me to demonstrate the current capability of the steam engine. The crown prince ordered the eunuch to prepare the steam-powered locomotive. At first, the king was puzzled. You attached a steam engine to wheels? Hang confidently lit the fire and said, all right, let me start the demonstration. He placed a burning coal into the locomotive's furnace. The king and the ministers held their breath, anxiously waiting for the results. The water inside the locomotive began to boil. Steam was released, and soon the model train started moving along the tracks. The king, overjoyed, celebrated, oh, it's moving, it's actually working. Hang smiled and replied, this is just a model. But I will do my best to study how we can apply it in real life. If we succeed, we could travel from Hanyang to Busan in just one day. We could journey from the southern tip to the northernmost part of Yashin in a single day. And when that happens, the heartbeat of Yashin will be revived. The king, still amazed, asked, what do you mean by, the heartbeat of Yashin will be revived? Hang explained, if we look at the current situation, we can see that the heart of Zoyan has slowed down. Due to the mountainous terrain, people are unable to leave the places where they were born. They live and die on the same land. But if we have trains that can travel across the country, Joseon will truly witness a new era, bringing widespread benefits to humanity. While Minister Kim Jong-un and Right Prime Minister Min Se-young were in awe, saying, "It sounds like a dream," the king remained calm, carefully considering the idea. Heng carefully observed the king's expression, trying to gauge his thoughts. Not only was the research promising success, but it was also clear that it would require a significant amount of money and resources. Understanding this concern, the Crown Prince ordered the Minister of Public Works present the plan to His Majesty. The minister responded, "Yes, Your Highness," and, along with another official, retrieved a stack of plans and placed them on the table for the king to review. King Sejong could hardly believe his eyes. It was an enormous pile of plans. He opened the first one, which was a comprehensive development plan for the entire country. There were so many words. It made his head spin. And he muttered, "I hate quill pens so much." Heng explained, "These are strategic plans to strengthen Joseon. Based on our geography, economic conditions, population distribution, and resource allocation, the king, overwhelmed, began counting silently, 30, 35, 40, there were 42 volumes in total. He remarked, "Well, they're worth reading, I suppose," and then ordered the left prime minister study them with the other ministers. Afterward, Heng made another request. "Father, I have one more petition. The research institute is severely lacking in talent. None of the officials, including myself, are getting proper rest." The king, intrigued, randomly called upon the Minister of Public Works to verify. "Is that true?" The minister, on the verge of tears, replied, "The Crown Prince is currently managing not just one, but several projects. There's too much work and too few people. We hardly have any time to rest." The king, still curious, asked, "Can you find more people?" The Minister of Public Works responded honestly. "Rumors about the heavy workload have spread everywhere. No one dares to join. At first, many came because they thought they'd be promoted. But every time someone new arrives, the Crown Prince starts another project. Your Majesty knows, the Research Institute has only been around for a little over 6 months. But we've already created so many things and have so much work to do." The king, frowning and gritting his teeth, seemed like he would get angry. But instead, he smiled and said, "Hiang, you're quite diligent, aren't you?" Hiang, grinning and scratching his head, replied, "Father, you are truly wise." Now understanding the situation, the king promised, "I'll help resolve the personnel issue. But it seems that the research will require a significant amount of funding. This matter needs to be discussed seriously before we make any decisions." Hiang, a bit downcast, responded, "I understand, Father." The king then added, "But it seems you still haven't shown me everything. I've already provided a substantial budget for the Research Institute. This can't be all you've accomplished." Noticing the king's expression, Hiang immediately understood. As expected from father, he thought. The king, speaking with a hint of mystery, said, "Shouldn't we go check it out?" He was, of course, referring to Area 51. Early in the morning, the king and Hiang were riding horses together within the palace grounds. The king said, "Riding horses together like this is quite nice, isn't it?" Hiang cheerfully replied, "I think so too, father." After a while, the king curiously asked, "What does Area 51 feet even mean?" Hiang suddenly realized and said, "It's nothing really important. It just sounds nice," and laughed awkwardly. The king gave him a puzzled look. But they continued riding toward Area 51. When they arrived at the entrance, the king said, "It seems we're here." Hiang replied, "Yes, father." As they approached the gate, 2 guards stopped them, loudly commanding, "Halt, only those with proper authorization can enter this area. Present your token." The king, surprised, said, "What, how insolent." Hiang quickly explained, "Father, even I can't enter without the token. Security here is of utmost importance. So please don't be upset." Hiang then produced a token bearing the yin yang symbol. Upon seeing the token, the guards saluted and allowed them to enter, shouting, "Permission granted." Watching this ritual, the king was bewildered, thinking, "What kind of posture is that?" Now that they were past security, they continued riding inside. As they went, the king remarked, "Hiang, you seem to take security here very seriously." Hiang replied, "It's to prevent any secrets from leaking out." "Father," the king thought to himself, "what exactly is this boy doing here that requires such measures?" Upon reaching the entrance of the display area, they were greeted by General Choi Hee-san and the chief steward, who stood at attention and saluted. The king noticed, this posture is different from before, but it's very formal. General Choi Hee-san bowed politely and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Everyone has worked hard. The soldiers' uniforms looked slightly different but were very distinctive. The king, now curious, asked, "What exactly is the main work here?" The general respectfully replied, "We are focused on improving and developing explosives, Your Majesty. In addition, we are working on advancing cannons and firearms, as well as creating new weapons and military strategies. In short, all military-related research is conducted here." The king nodded, "I understand," eager to see more. The king said, "I'd like to see what everyone has been working on. General, would you lead the way?" General Hisan gestured, "This way, Your Majesty," and pointed in the direction. He added, "From here on, we cannot continue on horseback," and requested the guards to open the gate to receive the king. The king thought to himself, what could be behind this gate that requires such strict measures? General Choi Hisan led the king and he Yang into a large open area where military defense equipment was on display. The king, astonished, exclaimed, "What is that? Isn't that gunpowder?" General Hisan responded, "Yes, Your Majesty. We've developed a new type of gunpowder that is much stronger than the one Joseon is currently using." The king stroked his beard. Deep in thought, General Choi Hisan requested permission to explain and led the king to inspect the weapons more closely. As they walked, General Choi began explaining the composition of the weapons in detail. First, this powder, which resembles dirt in color, is the original gunpowder we use for convenience. It's called original gunpowder. The general picked up a sample and continued. And this here is a more powerful version, twice as strong. Developed from the original gunpowder. The king asked to hold the sample and examined it carefully. He remarked, "It's darker than the original gunpowder." "What's the difference?" General Choi explained, "Allow me to explain, Your Majesty, like the current gunpowder. The raw ingredients are mixed, and then water is sprinkled on to bind them. Once it's dried, similar to fermented tofu, it's ground into powder and sifted. Up until this point, the process is the same. However, the next step is a bit different." He continued, "The sifted gunpowder must then be mixed with graphite." The king, now able to picture the gunpowder making process, realized that graphite must be what he had asked the miners to find. General Choi confirmed, "Yes, Your Majesty." The king asked, "What's its purpose?" The general explained, "It serves several purposes, but when mixed with gunpowder, it prevents moisture and stops the gunpowder from exploding prematurely. Additionally, it allows us to eliminate the need for sulfur." The king, surprised, asked, "No sulfur? But without sulfur, can it still explode?" The general replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." The king then asked, "Sulfur has been used in gunpowder for centuries. Are you sure it's safe to omit it?" General Choi responded, "Indeed, Your Majesty. By not using sulfur, the gunpowder gains another characteristic. Though this is both a strength and a weakness. It cannot be ignited with a standard fuse." The king, taken aback, asked, "Then how do you ignite it?" General Choi held up an object and said, "We use this, Your Majesty." The king looked at the item in the general's hands but couldn't quite understand what it was. General Choi introduced it. "This is what we call a prison, or a bronze firing cap. It can hold the special gunpowder developed by the crown prince." The king was amazed, using a different type of gunpowder for the ignition? Isn't that too complicated? Choi Hae-san replied, "Instead of explaining further, Your Majesty, we've prepared a demonstration. I believe you'll want to see it for yourself. Please follow me to the testing area." When the king and the ministers arrived at the testing grounds, they were astonished by the sheer size of the place. The king remarked, "I see there are scarecrows over there, those must be the targets, right?" General Choi began organizing the demonstration. "Let's begin the exercise." Two soldiers, armed with the new firearms, stepped forward and took their positions. The ministers, not yet familiar with the new weaponry, were puzzled, saying, "What are those? They look strange." He chuckled and said, "Those are the newly created guns." The soldiers began loading the gunpowder and ammunition. General Choi explained each step to the king. They're using the bronze firing cap to ignite the powder. The soldiers aimed carefully, using their sights to focus on the targets. The general then gave the command, "Fire." The soldiers pulled the triggers and bullets shot through the air, flying straight toward the targets with tremendous force. The power of the shot was astonishing and impressed the king and the ministers, leaving them speechless. They exclaimed in awe, "The power is incredible." Despite the long distance, the force of the shot showed no signs of diminishing, leaving everyone amazed. The crown prince praised the air, saying sulfur couldn't compare to this, compared to bows. guns have the disadvantage of limited range. But this weapon has overcome that weakness and possesses tremendous power. It truly is the ultimate weapon. Hyun, upon hearing this, was very pleased but remained humble, saying, "You all praise me too much. This is all thanks to the hard work of the officials and artisans. We propose naming this gun, Armored Weapon Cannon," one of the officials said. The prince then turned to General Choi Or-san and remarked, "The name, Armored Weapon Cannon, is well suited. Bring it to me, I want to see it with my own eyes." However, General Choi hesitated and responded, "Your Highness, before that, may I present another type of explosive?" The prince, somewhat puzzled, asked, "Another type of explosive? What do you mean?" Choi Hyson replied, "Yes, Your Highness. To the left is the standard gunpowder we use. Next to it is an explosive known as explosive silver, which the heir developed for use with bronze spears. There's also cotton gunpowder, made from cotton fabric. And on the far left is an advanced explosive called armored gunpowder, which has been improved from cotton gunpowder. Additionally, we have a special explosive oil, which was also created by the heir." Upon hearing this, the prince grew concerned. Explosive silver? Could it be made using precious silver? Hyung quickly clarified, "No, Your Highness, we used mercury. While mercury is valuable, it is more accessible than silver. Moreover, it doesn't require much, as it's only used for detonation." Hearing this, the prince felt reassured. Good to know. But what is explosive oil? General Choi ordered someone to bring the explosive oil. A servant brought a wooden box, and the prince commanded, "Open the box and show me." The servant opened the box, and General Choi cautioned both the prince and the heir. "Please step back a little, it could be dangerous." He then slowly revealed the contents to the prince. The prince marveled at the heir's creation, saying, "You have created something extraordinary." Although filled with pride, Hyung humbly stated, "Father, you flatter me, but with the current state of Joseon, this weapon cannot be used yet." The prince, surprised, asked, "Why not?" Hyung explained, "This explosive is extremely sensitive to impact during transportation. If the barrels were to collide or experience heavy vibrations, it would explode instantly. Furthermore, during the spring or summer, when the weather is hot, production becomes nearly impossible due to the use of concentrated acid, which makes the manufacturing process very dangerous." Upon hearing this, the prince became worried, saying, "Indeed, it seems to be a troublesome weapon." General Choi then spoke up. "That is why we have improved and created armored gunpowder, an explosive made by combining cotton gunpowder, explosive oil, and citrus oil in a specific ratio." The prince, slightly shocked, asked Hyung, "Combining it with explosive oil, didn't you just say it's difficult to use?" Choi Hyson explained, "Cotton gunpowder and citrus oil have neutralized the explosive nature of the oil." "Your Highness," the prince finally understood but still inquired, "Why do you call it armored gunpowder?" General Choi was also left speechless and responded, "I'm not entirely sure about that either." Hyung quickly interjected, "Ah, right, it's thanks to your Majesty's grace that the soldiers can use explosives so easily, which is why we named it that." However, Hyung was intentionally hiding the truth. He thought to himself, "Even if I were to be beheaded, I could never reveal that the name was inspired by the abbreviation of Nazi Germany, because the method of manufacturing originates from there." The prince, overjoyed, continuously praised Hyung. "You have made a great contribution, my son. The new gun and explosive will undoubtedly become a powerful asset for Joseon. Our nation will only grow stronger and more prosperous." The prince then turned to the left minister and asked, "How will mass production proceed?" The left minister responded, "First, we need to determine the production costs." "Your Highness, what are the costs?" Hyung replied, "The cost is about 30% higher than the production cost of the same quantity of standard armored gunpowder. However, by using only half the amount, we can achieve the same power. Currently, though, it is difficult for Joseon to procure large quantities of saltpeter and sulfur. Additionally, the main ingredient, cotton fabric, must be of a high grade without any fibers. The biggest issue, however, is that the primary ingredient for explosive oil is citrus oil, which is extracted from pig and cow fat." The prince, shocked and disheartened, said, "Oh no, in an era without a petrochemical industry. It would have been better if I hadn't known that such a powerful explosive could be created." Hyung approached to comfort and encourage his father, saying, "Father, don't give up. Abandoning national defense is the path to ruin." The prince replied. Who doesn't know that? But the current situation in Joseon doesn't allow us to know how to proceed. Hyeon then bluntly reminded him. What was the reason you initiated the country's reforms, father? Wasn't it to overcome these difficult times? At that moment, Hyeon continued. Right now, I, along with General Choi, Lord Leitrim, and many other officials, as well as Master Young Baitoa and numerous artisans, are all striving to find solutions. Father, I believe that survival is a challenge, and giving up is death. Hearing these words, the prince regained his spirit. He became more determined and confident in his decisions, joyfully saying, You are right. From the moment I ascended the throne, I vowed to give my all for the prosperity of Joseon. Then the prince addressed everyone. My loyal subjects, focus your minds and dedicate yourselves to the success of our nation's reform. The officials, deeply moved by his words, responded in unison. We pledge to give our utmost efforts. The prince replied, Good. We are united as one. Many years later, all the officials collectively sighed. If only we hadn't inspected Area 51 back then, we wouldn't be so exhausted now. Tao Lan Ji Hong Hai slapped his mouth and said, This mouth of mine has caused me trouble. Truly, disaster comes from the mouth. The officials' complaints were likely due to the overwhelming workload. Returning to the events at Area 51. Before leaving, King Chung and Ion, unable to conceal his satisfaction, spoke to the crown prince. This is a remarkable accomplishment. I will spare no resources to support this endeavor. Find a way to mass-produce the gunpowder. I want to see all of Joseon's soldiers equipped with this state-of-the-art weapon soon. The crown prince, Karon, smiled and responded. I obey your command. But as the king glanced at the pale faces and thin bodies of the workers, he couldn't help but feel worried. All of this is thanks to the hard work of the artisans. How much they must have struggled to look so worn out, he thought. Then, the king turned to General Choi and asked, Explain the process of completing the musket to me. With emotions welling up and almost shedding tears, General Choi joyfully responded. Yes, your majesty. To craft a musket with rifling, all the tools must be custom-made. The crown prince chimed in to add more details, recounting how, after he made his request, two artisans had nervously discussed. The crown prince wants us to forge a rifling rod. The other asked, Can we use the old anvil? I don't know. But we must follow the crown prince's orders, he responded. Suddenly, someone burst in and shouted. The crown prince has sent the necessary materials. Everyone turned to look and wondered. What is this? A metal rod? At that moment, the crown prince ordered them to begin. Artisan Don was in charge of coiling the rod into the rifling tool. Artisan 2 was tasked with placing the rod in the casting frame, which had been prepared. Artisan Kim was responsible for using a specialized belt to forge the rod that had been placed in the frame. The crown prince also reminded them. After filling the gaps, you must use a file to smooth it. Check carefully to ensure the frame is completely filled. Everyone responded in unison. Yes. We understand. The crown prince, fully serious, grabbed a horn and urged the officials to scout quickly and get everything done perfectly. Hurry up and get to work, he commanded. The artisans, rushing through their tasks while being scolded, inwardly felt like crying, thinking, how can we even do this? But thanks to the artisans' hard work, 5 prototype muskets were successfully completed. The crown prince praised them, saying, These are truly masterpieces, created from blood and sweat. At Area 51, the crown prince stood silently, observing with a determined gaze. The atmosphere weighed heavily on every artisan and soldier, as they all knew that today's trials were not merely simple gun tests, but decisions that would determine the future of the kingdom of Joseon. The crown prince carefully gave instructions, his voice calm but powerful. Now, let's begin testing its actual performance. First, let's check if it can withstand the gunpowder. Yes, Your Highness, they replied. Then the crown prince suggested. The old musket used 1 hectogram of powder. So let's start with half. The artisans around nodded in agreement. understanding the importance of every step in the process. No one dared to be careless. Each person was fully focused. General Choi Hee-san then firmly commanded. Fire! 2 bullets shot out from the barrel, cutting through the air. All eyes were fixed on the bullet's trajectory. The Crown Prince, unable to hide his anticipation, quickly asked, "What's the result?" General Choi, both delighted and tense, immediately reported. Half a hectogram of armored gunpowder and half of the secondary gunpowder have no issues. However, considering the purpose of the long musket, I don't think there's a need to increase it to 2 hectograms. The Crown Prince nodded, satisfaction evident on his face. But he made sure to emphasize. Good. Then let's reduce the amount of gunpowder to find the optimal quantity. The killing range of the old musket is 40 paces. Let's use that as our standard. Yes. Your Highness. They replied. And soon after, continuous musket tests were carried out under the Crown Prince's direction. Litron suddenly cheered in excitement as the results became clear. The bullet has pierced the target at a distance of 40 paces. Based on its power, it seems capable of hitting targets even further away. The Crown Prince, quietly pleased, calmly responded. Certainly. Litron excitedly proposed. Then let's try it at a distance of 50 paces this time. This is truly thrilling. Immediately after the command was given, 2 bullets tore through the air with a loud crack, creating an ear-splitting explosion. A thin layer of smoke lingered in the air, signaling the latent power of the musket. Li Jun couldn't contain his excitement and exclaimed, Your Highness! The secondary gunpowder has allowed the bullets to pierce the target at 70 paces. It's incredible. But then, his voice suddenly lowered, and the joy on his face was replaced by concern. But this is only a half success. His sudden change in demeanor caused the Crown Prince to frown in curiosity. Li Jun continued. We've fired over 20 shots, but none of them hit the mark. It seems that the trajectory of the bullets is unstable with each shot, leading to low accuracy. The Crown Prince nodded thoughtfully. Sharp observation. As expected. It's time to introduce them to that, he thought to himself. Then, the Crown Prince spoke up. But is that the only issue? Cleaning and reloading the gun seemed to take a long time. Why not try skipping those 2 steps? Li Jun, somewhat surprised, asked. But if we do that, the bullets might fall out. The Crown Prince sternly replied. We just need to craft bullets that fit the barrel properly. Try it out. Yes. Your Highness. General Choi responded. But inwardly, he felt a bit frustrated. We already have the answer. So why even ask? He thought. As for the Crown Prince, seeing their confusion, he simply smiled to himself, thinking that letting them figure it out on their own would be better than telling them directly. Let them experience what I've learned from Mixtub, he thought. It will not only lead to progress but also instill confidence in the craftsman. After some time spent following the Crown Prince's guidance, General Choi Hasten returned to report. We've tried the method as per your Highness instructions, but the gunpowder residue obstructed the next shot. I see. The Crown Prince pondered for a moment before continuing. So, cleaning is still necessary. General Choi, think carefully. On the battlefield, cavalry will charge quickly. Will there be time to clear the barrel? This question left General Choi stammering, quietly admitting that the prince was right. His expression showed his embarrassment. While next to him, Li Jun scratched his head, lost in thought. Then what should we do? The Crown Prince silently observed, feeling a bit disappointed. Must I intervene again? He thought. But just before he could speak, General Choi suddenly had an idea and exclaimed. Why not try carving grooves? Li Jun turned, eyes wide with surprise. Grooves? He asked. General Choi nodded and pointed toward a nearby stream. Yes. Look at that stream. The water flows along the grooves. The fire from the gunpowder also has a flow. Isn't it the same? If we carve a long groove inside the barrel, the gunpowder residue might escape along the flow of the flame. Li Jun, now astonished, realized. That seems worth trying. The Crown Prince, hearing this, felt satisfied and thought to himself. Looks like I don't need to intervene after all. But just when things seemed to be going smoothly, a craftsman stepped forward, his face filled with concern. General Choi. But how do we carve the grooves? This question hit like a splash of cold water, dampening the excitement. General Choi, now confused, muttered, "We're back to square one." The Crown Prince could only smile wryly, realizing it's far from finished. However, he wasn't discouraged. This is a long journey, and each small step forward is still progress. The artisans pondered and worked tirelessly through many nights, and eventually, they created a tool to carve grooves. Additionally, they crafted long muskets with grooves, ranging from 3 to 15. Yet, in their subsequent tests, General Choi Hee-san and Jang Ion encountered a new problem. At this moment, Li Jian sighed and said to the other officials, "So, in the end, cleaning is still the solution?" Another official, full of concern, asked, "What are the exact results?" Li Jian hesitated for a moment before responding. "Well, each number of grooves has its own pros and cons. With 6 grooves or fewer, the power doesn't decrease significantly. But there's a lot of gunpowder residue. With 9 grooves or more, there's less residue, but the power drops sharply." He sighed again and asked, "So what do we do? Is 9 grooves the solution?" "But the problem with 9 grooves is that the power decreases too much," another official pointed out. "What about 6 grooves?" someone else asked. Li Jian immediately replied, "Then the gunpowder residue becomes an issue again. If only there were a better way." At that moment, the Crown Prince was also present, silently pondering. Will they figure it out this time? Suddenly, Zhang Yangso spoke up. "Why don't we try spiraling the grooves?" His words caught everyone off guard, especially the Crown Prince, who smiled with satisfaction, thinking, "Excellent. That's the spirit." The Crown Prince then stepped forward and asked Zhang Yangso, "Please explain further." "Yes, Your Highness." Zhang Yangso replied, "If we make the gunpowder's path spiral, wouldn't the length increase? That way, even with just 6 grooves, the length would be enough for the gunpowder residue to escape. And because the grooves are spiraled, the explosive force of the gunpowder wouldn't be wasted." The other officials, suddenly realizing the potential, brightened up and shouted excitedly, "That's it. It seems possible. Your Highness. Spiraling the grooves might be the solution." The Crown Prince immediately ordered, "Then let's test it." Afterward, numerous tests were conducted, and eventually, they found the optimal shape to achieve the highest performance. A voice rang out. "The 6-groove spiraled musket, with 1.5 turns, is ready for testing." This is also a great opportunity to understand the concepts of maximum range and effective range. Li Jiang hurriedly urged everyone, quickly record and categorize the results. Seeing how hard they were working, full of enthusiasm, the Crown Prince nodded in satisfaction, thinking, they truly understand. Grasping one thing, they learn 10 more. If given the right conditions, these people could win a Nobel Prize. He smiled contentedly and thought, "My servants, grow quickly and automate everything." At the same time, both Li Jiang and Yang Iansu suddenly felt a chill run down their spines. Why does it feel so eerie all of a sudden? They wondered. While everyone was working hard, Li Qiu suddenly noticed something wasn't right. He looked at the instruction sheet and muttered to himself, "What is this all about?" At that moment, General Qiu Heisen passed by and, noticing Li Jian's confusion, stopped to ask, "What's the matter?" "Sir? It's nothing major, General Qiu," Li Jian replied. "But according to Yang Iansu's instructions, we didn't carve spiraled grooves into the musket barrels. Somehow, that seems to have significantly improved accuracy. What do you think, General Qiu?" I find it strange as well. Improving performance is great. But it's unsettling not to know the reason behind it. Cho responded, falling into thought along with Li Jiang. Suddenly, a craftsman spoke up, breaking the silence. Could it be that the spiraled grooves make the bullet spin when fired? The simple question startled General Chiu. What do you mean? Explain yourself. Well, sir, the craftsman replied humbly. I come from a background in fletching. When attaching feathers to arrows, I always attach them at a slight angle. This makes the arrow spin as it flies through the air, allowing it to travel straighter and resist wind better. Both Li Jiang and General Chiu were astonished by this explanation. They immediately began taking notes, recording every detail, and prepared the important documents to present to King Cheng and Ion. When the king flipped through the pages of the research, his eyes lit up as he saw the thorough studies. He couldn't help but exclaim, now I understand why the crown prince and the officials kept this a secret. If the musket's performance were to be leaked, the technique would surely be stolen. With that, the king cheerfully ordered, bring the forge here immediately. We must follow through with this plan. Then, the king tossed the stack of secret documents into the forge, burning them entirely to protect the dynasty. He approached the crown prince and praised him. You've worked hard, my son. This is a monumental achievement. The crown prince, Jiang, humbly bowed and replied, it is all thanks to your grace, father. The king then turned to the artisans, his curiosity piqued by their unfamiliar attire. He thought to himself, now that I think about it, I should ask about those outfits commonly seen in Area 51. After a moment, he asked, is there anything else to show me? If not, explain these outfits to me. General Choi respectfully responded, there are still a few things left to show. Your Majesty. Chief Steward. Bring it out for His Highness. He then explained, this time, what I wish to present to you, father, is the mounted armored weapon, the mini pistol. King Chung and Ion was taken aback, exclaiming, a pistol? Bring it closer so I can have a look. As the king held the newly crafted pistol in his hand, he couldn't help but remark, what a peculiar object. He then noticed 6 chambers and asked, could this gun fire 6 shots in a row? The crown prince proudly replied, that's correct, father. Really? The king asked, his curiosity growing, while the officials around them whispered in amazement. How could they have achieved that without all the proper tools? How did they manage? Feeling incredibly proud, the crown prince explained, this is one of the masterpieces from Area 51. Of course, the design already existed. King Chung and Ion, unable to contain his excitement, immediately commanded, I want to see how it works right now. General Choi replied, yes, Your Majesty. He then got into position, ready to fire. He aimed the pistol and fired 6 consecutive shots, all hitting the target accurately. The officials who were watching couldn't help but praise him. General Choi. That was incredible. Truly the best of the best. The Crown Prince Hyang, filled with pride, thought to himself, I worked hard to create this. One of the officials stepped forward and asked, may I inspect the target? General Choi graciously responded, of course. With permission granted. The official quickly ran to the dummy to examine the shots. Seeing that all 6 bullets had hit critical points, he turned back and reported to the prince, Your Highness, with this kind of power, any enemy within 30 paces will be sent straight to hell. The king, unable to contain his surprise, shouted, Are you certain? I am certain, Your Majesty. The official replied, overjoyed. The king couldn't help but marvel at the achievements of his people. You have truly accomplished something extraordinary. Seeing how exhausted you all are, I am convinced that the deputy minister's praise was well-founded. You have worked very hard. The Crown Prince Hyang, ever humble but still proud, respectfully replied, Your Majesty is too kind. The king, still impressed, asked. You've done well, my son. Now, what about the armor? The crown prince bowed slightly and said, Forgive me, father. But there is still another weapon I haven't introduced yet. The king, shocked, exclaimed. Another one? How many more weapons are there? The crown prince, aware that it was nearly time for lunch, remained resolute. The next weapon I wish to present is the firebomb. As for lunch, it can wait. Let's go. The king, though amused, couldn't help but indulge his son, thinking to himself, this boy really has a fascination with firepower. As they walked further, the king noticed the distance from the palace and remarked, This place is quite far from the royal grounds. The crown prince quickly explained, We needed a large, open space for testing the firebomb. Upon arrival, the king saw an expansive field with several dummies set up in staggered positions. He couldn't hide his curiosity. What kind of firebomb requires such a vast, empty space? Did you clear all the trees here? The crown prince responded. Yes, father. To prevent any risk of fire, we cleared the area thoroughly. The king, along with the other officials, was astonished as the crown prince introduced the firebomb. This is the newly developed firebomb. We propose naming it. Immediately, the officials began discussing the name excitedly. It sounds like a version of the heaven-shaking thunderbolt. The heaven-shaking thunderbolt? Isn't that the thunder weapon from the Jin kingdom of old? It seems so. I heard it's similar to General Loi Vu Tian's explosive cannon. But maybe the term was added because it uses a rocket launcher. Crown Prince Hurong stood on the sidelines, watching with immense satisfaction. He thought to himself, even in another life, I couldn't miss these iconic moments. True classics among the classics. The sea is ruled by the northern compass, while the land is ruled by the Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi. The truth was, on the night before, as darkness settled over the palace in Area 51, a serious discussion had stretched late into the night. The officials were tense, listening to every exchange. Suddenly, a voice broke the uneasy silence. Which one should we choose? MK1 or MK2? Or maybe MK 2.1? Crown Prince Hurong, present at the meeting, suddenly asked, What is MK? The officials exchanged tired glances, sighing internally, thinking, Here we go again. The prince is about to say something strange. One of them muttered to himself, Looks like we won't be going home tonight. Then, one of the officials stood up to explain. What your highness referred to is an arbitrary classification based on the detonation type of the Tran Tien Loi. MK1 is the type where, when the gunpowder explodes, the fragments inside are scattered in all directions, injuring the enemy. MK2 is the version where, upon ignition, fire spews out from the gunpowder chamber, causing the Tran Tien Loi to spin and shoot flames and shrapnel in all directions. As for MK 2.1, it uses an iron plate to seal the chamber before releasing fire and shrapnel. Crown Prince Hyang immediately followed up, his tone sharp. Which one is the most effective? One official began to speak. Your Highness, in my opinion. But before he could finish, John Ion-su quickly covered his mouth, interrupting. Please, sir, be silent for a moment. I apologize for the disrespect, but please wait a little longer. At that moment, anger flared on Crown Prince Hyang's face. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted furiously. Why are we debating this? We've already decided to make both versions. And we'll choose MK 2.1, the 21st century version. This military meeting is adjourned. Everyone, go rest. The officials, startled by the sudden outburst, quickly asked, But what about you? Your Highness? The Crown Prince grinned and replied, I've just come up with a great idea. How could I sit still now? You're all distracting me. Dismiss yourselves. With that, Zhang Yongso swiftly ushered the other officials out of the room, whispering, Let's go. Gentlemen. The Crown Prince has everything under control. Back at the open field, King Chung and Ion was staring intently at the firebomb lying on the table. With a hint of skepticism, he asked, "Is this really something you developed? This Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi?" General Choi respectfully replied, "Yes. Your Majesty. The Crown Prince personally designed it. From its concept to its form." Hearing this, the king couldn't help but express his surprise. "Really? I'd love to know the principle behind it." However, General Choi hesitated for a moment. Luckily, Crown Prince Hyang quickly intervened, saying, "Please allow us to explain everything after the demonstration." Two soldiers hurriedly dragged out the cannon. General Choi, in a serious tone, reminded the king and the other officials, "It's dangerous. Please take cover behind the wall." The soldiers carefully loaded the Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi into the cannon barrel, then quickly hid behind the brick wall, awaiting orders. A voice from a distance shouted, "Fire, fire, fire!" The cannon was ignited with a deafening roar, and the missile shot out like a rocket, carrying immense power. The king watched with anticipation, but after a moment, there was no visible reaction. Puzzled, he turned to General Choi and asked, "Nothing is happening?" General Choi responded, "It's about to explode, Your Majesty." The missile slowed down as it approached the center of the target, and suddenly, it detonated with immense force. The explosion was so devastating that the officials stood in awe, their mouths agape at the sheer power of the weapon. After the blinding light subsided, a cloud of thick black smoke began to clear, revealing the shredded remains of the dummies, utterly obliterated. One worried official asked, "Your Majesty, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Just a little startled," the king replied. The official then said, "Your Majesty, you may stand now." The king, slightly shaken, coughed and stood, but his eyes remained fixed on the scene of destruction before him. Another official, still in shock, asked, How could it be this powerful?" The sight was horrifying. The force of the explosion had completely annihilated the dummies, reducing them to shreds. The king, still trying to process what he had witnessed, exclaimed, "How could this be? Is this really the power of a single firebomb?" Another official chimed in, "If this were a real battlefield, it would surely turn into a hellscape." Overcome by curiosity, the king turned to General Choi and commanded, "Explain to me how the Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi works." General Choi respectfully answered, "Yes, Your Majesty. First, the outer shell of the bomb is made as thin as possible, ensuring it can withstand the force when fired and upon landing, while still being strong enough to contain the internal explosion. Inside, the shell is packed with tiny iron balls. This increases the number of fragments, thereby enhancing its lethal effect. Lastly, we skip the step of mixing clay into the gunpowder to maintain the explosive force." Upon hearing this, the king was astonished, realizing the brilliance behind the design. "Truly, your efforts are commendable. But can this type of firebomb be mass-produced?" General Choi, pleased by the king's question, responded, "If we are supplied with enough gunpowder, mass production is certainly possible." "Your Majesty." Another official, still doubtful, asked, "General, are you sure? To mass-produce such a powerful firebomb, you'll need many skilled artisans. Isn't Area 51 short on manpower?" General Choi nodded and replied, "The deputy minister is correct. But Crown Prince Hyun has already solved that problem during the design phase of the firebomb." He then recounted the discussions that had taken place over the past few days, involving Jaeon Yongkyol, Lee Chun, and General Choi Haesan. Jaeon Aonso presented a blueprint and said, "This is the design for the Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi, personally drawn by the Crown Prince." The two other officials were astonished and puzzled. "We don't understand any of this. It looks so strange. Male and female threads?" The Crown Prince then spoke up to explain. "If you want to load gunpowder into the sphere, making a complete sphere from the start is highly inefficient. Instead, you should divide the sphere into two hemispheres. One side is carved with a male thread, and the other with a female thread. By twisting them together along the threads, you can form a complete sphere. By the way, you can also learn about the concept of bolts and nuts here. When it reaches the target, the explosion will be extremely powerful. At this point, the two officials were taken aback. The power is terrifying. With such strength, we can equip this for our soldiers immediately. General Choi then asked the Crown Prince, "Shall we report this to His Majesty?" Crown Prince Hyung calmly replied, "Not yet. There are still many things to test. The thinner the shell, the greater the power. So first, let's try gradually reducing the thickness of the shell." After numerous tests and productions by the skilled artisans, Li John hurriedly approached with a beaming face. The Crown Prince knew it had to be good news. Li John eagerly reported, "Your Highness, after reducing the thickness, we found that the minimum thickness that can withstand the impact during firing and landing is 3 units less." The Crown Prince was surprised. "Really? Then now, let's load gunpowder and see how the result differs." Official Litron, still amazed, responded, "Yes, Your Highness." Once again, the artisans worked day and night, crafting new weapons for the next series of tests, regardless of their exhaustion and fatigue. The next morning, the test was carried out, and Litron nervously reported to the Crown Prince, "The minimum thickness remains reduced by 3 units. The Crown Prince, still not completely satisfied, responded, "Then report this to my father." However, he added, "But the blast radius is too wide. There's a risk of our own troops being hard. We need to find a way to reduce the blast radius while still maintaining the power." This statement left the two artisans feeling even more helpless. They gathered with 2 other artisans and discussed, "How can we increase power while reducing the blast radius?" One artisan, after reviewing the documents repeatedly, sighed in frustration, "I'm at a loss. This task from His Highness is too difficult." From a distance, Crown Prince Hurong observed their struggle and thought, "Looks like I'll have to step in and help a little." He then approached and asked, "Any progress?" One of the artisans respectfully replied, "Your Highness, we are still working on it." At that moment, the Crown Prince offered a suggestion. "Why don't we try applying a thick layer of clay inside the bomb and then tightly fix small lead pellets into it? Once the clay dries, it will hold them in place. How about that?" The artisans were enlightened by the Crown Prince's insight, exclaiming in surprise, "Ah! So that's the solution. What a brilliant idea. We never would have thought of it." "Your Highness." After speaking, the Crown Prince smiled and walked away. But not before offering encouragement to everyone. "I'm off now. Keep up the good work." Once the Crown Prince was out of sight, both Li Qian and General Choi were still in shock. It's as if His Highness already knew the answer. Li Qian remarked. He nodded and added, "If that's the case, didn't we waste all this effort?" They were furious. Days without going home. Frustrated and muttering angrily. Clever trickster. However, in the end, that tactic had encouraged the artisans to think and research on their own. It had not only helped them follow instructions, but also understand the principles behind the weapons creation. Thanks to this process, they had become reliable craftsmen, capable of mass-producing the firebombs without obstacles. General Choi, with a tone of confidence, replied, "Exactly. Mass production won't be an issue." At this point, the king could no longer hide his surprise. A hint of admiration lingered in his mind as he thought, "This boy. I have no words to describe him." Suddenly, the king remembered something. "Wait. I have one more question. I've been wondering since I saw the test. Why didn't the firebomb explode immediately? I'm curious about its mechanism." General Choi, with a thoughtful expression, replied, "That's because the Phi Kichtran Tien Loi contains a subtle secret." Your Majesty. The king, Young and Ion, was taken aback. "A subtle secret?" Tae Young asked General Choi. What is this subtle secret? Hesitant. The general explained. It's the ability to adjust the explosion time. Your Majesty. Tae-young, astonished, asked. Really? General Choi continued. Yes. By winding the fuse around a bamboo tube, we can control the detonation time. The king, finally grasping the concept, excitedly asked. So, the explosion time is determined by the length of the fuse, right? General Choi respectfully responded. That's correct. Your Majesty. The king's eyes lit up with excitement, as if he had discovered a treasure. Gazing at the bomb in awe, he said. So, only we know the exact explosion time. This truly is a subtle secret. Brilliant. Meanwhile, the crown prince, witnessing the conversation, silently thought to himself. Actually, this feature has existed since the creation of the Phi Kich Tran Tien Loi by King Bantong. The crown prince approached his father and respectfully reported. Father, I have shown you all the weapons. Seeing his father nod in agreement, the prince then suggested. Shall we return to the palace now? But the king placed a hand on his son's shoulder and signaled. Wait. Is there anything else you want to show me? Hearing this, the crown prince felt a wave of fear wash over him. His face was drenched in sweat as he stammered. Of course. Father. Please follow me. When they arrived, the king's eyes sparkled with excitement, filled with anticipation. Finally, I get to see it. Meanwhile, the crown prince was inwardly screaming. How is he not tired? I just want to go home. The king, noticing that the soldiers' uniforms were different from those of the usual Joseon army, commanded his son. Explain these uniforms to me. The crown prince, bowing respectfully, replied. Yes. Father. First, regarding the soldiers' uniforms, the crown prince began. We have made improvements to make them more suitable for using muskets. We've also dyed them in green and earth yellow. At this point, the king raised an eyebrow, puzzled. Why those two colors? Anticipating his father's question, the crown prince explained. These colors were chosen to make it harder for the enemy to spot our troops. The green and brown shades blend in with the forest and the ground. Hearing this, the king stroked his chin and looked down. But on the battlefield, shouldn't soldiers wear bright colors to intimidate the enemy? Additionally, wouldn't it be difficult for our own troops to distinguish each other? The crown prince replied. We are still refining our military strategies to address those concerns. Father, these uniforms are only in the testing phase. It will be a while before they are put into practical use. The king nodded, appearing to agree. But the crown prince continued. That's not all. We are also working on improvements to armor. The crown prince then invited everyone inside. Here, we have the armor currently in use by the Joseon military. The king nodded. Yes. I'm quite familiar with this. The crown prince hesitated before continuing. However, in reality, fully equipping soldiers with this armor has been quite difficult. As you know, many soldiers had to procure their own armor. And as a result, the quality varies greatly. Due to financial limitations, many soldiers are forced to use subpar armor. The king listened attentively, nodding in agreement with the points being made, as did the officials standing behind him, carefully observing his reaction. As you know, this is the lamellar armor that has been in use since the late period of the previous dynasty. Inside, layers of silk fabric are reinforced with small iron plates, providing excellent protection. However, the crown prince added, this armor has several issues. First, it requires a lot of time and effort to produce. Not only does it take time to prepare the small iron plates, but each one must be meticulously fixed with rivets, which is labor-intensive. Second, the cost. He continued. From silk to fur, the materials are very expensive. Third, while the protection is good, there are weaknesses. Although it provides decent defense against arrows, the underarm and side areas are exposed. making it vulnerable in close combat. The Crown Prince paused before listing the fourth issue. Lastly, because the armor is heavy. It's difficult to wear for long periods. Since it's worn like a cloak. All the weight rests on the shoulders. The king, astonished by his son's thorough explanations, couldn't help but feel impressed. I didn't expect my son to bring up so many valid points, he thought. Finally, the king asked, "Is there a solution to this? To address these problems?" The Crown Prince said, gesturing toward the display. "We have developed something new." He pulled back a curtain to reveal a metallic figure dressed like a royal guard. "This is it." Everyone present gasped in amazement at the sight. "What is this?" the king asked, still surprised. With a respectful tone, the Crown Prince replied, "This is the improved armor we've designed to address the weaknesses of the lamellar armor." "Father, do you remember the moment when you calculated the price of this expensive armor? The armor weighs 16 taels and 10 gen. And the helmet weighs 4 taels and 5 gen. Are they trying to make it so only nobles can join the battle? How come the price of this armor and helmet, converted to today's value, is around 400.000.000? I planned to exclude the armor. But now I can't. I must also consider the soldiers engaging in close combat. By combining Western plate armor and riveted armor, we can make some adjustments." Suddenly, you seem to realize something and shout, "What on earth is this?" Returning to the present, you continue. "First, we replaced the small iron plates inside the fabric lining with a single steel plate. This allows the front and back to be protected by 2 steel plates, ensuring the upper body is well guarded. The waist is protected by overlapping the front and back steel plates. And the armpits are covered by attaching a round steel plate to the shoulder and arm guards. Moreover, the armor is divided into 2 parts. The upper body armor and the lower body armor, allowing the weight to be distributed evenly across the body. The lower body armor specifically protects the thighs." Everyone standing there was astonished to hear this. First, the cavalry and close combat soldiers would be equipped with full body armor, providing protection from the neck to the knees. The improved upper body armor would be used by musketeers and artillery soldiers. Those who had tried it on were curious, asking, "But what did the general say?" He explained. "They said it was a bit heavier. But because the weight was evenly distributed across the body, it was manageable. Moreover, the areas that were previously unprotected are now covered, making them feel much safer. This is the first time I've seen such armor. It's truly bizarre." Saying that, you stared at it intently. Not only is the shape unique, but the structure is also quite special. The Crown Prince, deep in thought, smiled to himself. "Even though I made it with my own hands, I still find it surprising. This type of armor will save both production costs and time, making it highly efficient." The more he explained, the more amazed everyone became. One person, lost in thought, suddenly stepped forward and said, "However, Your Highness, I have a question." You couldn't refuse. "Go ahead." "As I understand it, both the helmet and the armor plates are made of steel, right?" You had to admit that the man had a keen eye, paying meticulous attention to every detail. He bent down and asked, "So, do the craftsmen have to forge each steel plate by hand? Wouldn't that be too labor-intensive? I fear the cost may exceed even that of riveted armor." You understood what he was getting at and pondered the question for a while before replying. "That's a very good question. I've had the same concerns. That's why I plan to use the stamping method." At this point, everyone looked confused, not understanding what you meant. Hesitantly, they asked again. You confirmed firmly. "Yes. Stamping. The main reason I borrowed the idea from Western plate armor is that mass production requires stamping machines." The Crown Prince's father heard the idea and found it incredibly innovative. "What do you mean by using the stamping method?" "Just as the name suggests." "Father, it may sound unbelievable, but this is truly a concept I came up with myself. However, It would be better for you to see it in person. We will prepare and present it to you later. Surprised, the king asked again. My son can show it now. Turning with confidence, the prince responded. There are still a few items we haven't been able to demonstrate yet. We will prepare as soon as possible. But for now, I ask you to inspect the work first. The king, puzzled, didn't fully understand what the prince was planning. About an hour later, the officials reported. There are no issues with the records. Your Highness. The king nodded in satisfaction. Well done, everyone. Turning to General Hasten, he gently said. You've worked hard as well. Thanks to the efforts of all of you, our dynasty will become even stronger. The general respectfully bowed. Thank you, Your Highness. One of the officials hesitantly asked. So, is court dismissed for today? Everyone's faces lit up with joy at the thought of being able to go home. But the day was not yet over. The king suddenly announced. I want to visit the armory now. To see the production process for firearms and armor. His words left everyone in shock. They hadn't expected that their prince would want to tour so many places. Just when they thought they could celebrate going home, they now had to stay behind and serve. One of them politely said, Your Highness, it's already late in the day. There might not be enough time to inspect the armory. If you are absent for too long, the affairs of the court will fall behind. After considering this, the king turned and said, Then I'll inspect it first thing tomorrow morning. Don't misunderstand. I wasn't planning to go right now. Seeing the king's decision, the general replied, I understand. Your Highness. It was more than anyone expected. At the armory, the crowd shouted, Long live His Highness. Standing beside him, the crown prince said happily, First, Father, I'll show you the process of cannon making. Everyone was eager to witness this. Two men came into view. One was melting bronze, while the other was hammering it into shape. Both of them meticulously carved intricate designs to create a masterpiece. This process required the skillful hands of craftsmen. The king finally understood how such a work of art was made. It became clear that everyone had been assigned specific tasks throughout this process. I tried assigning different jobs to different people. Father, the prince said with pride, as his efforts had finally been recognized. It has proven to be very effective. Now, I'd like to see how they use the stamping method for armor production. The king praised the prince. You were right. It's better to see things with my own eyes. The prince respectfully responded. Yes, Father. I will make the preparations right away. Inwardly, the prince thought. The king must be curious about the stamping machine now. He called for the guards to give orders. Yes, Your Highness. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, the prince picked up a loudspeaker and shouted, Everyone, let's begin the armor production now. Upon hearing the order, the workers immediately started without hesitation. Even the king noticed that his son truly had the ability to manage things. However, there was one thing that puzzled him. Why are the people making cannons all moving? Son. Because we don't have enough craftsmen. Father. So that's the reason, the king said, realizing it was a simple explanation. At this moment, he felt a bit angry inside but crossed his arms and tried to suppress it. He couldn't scold the young prince, so all he could do was sigh. This situation is becoming more and more unsettling. Isn't it? He was certain that His Highness would soon demand a solution. Meanwhile, the officials were abuzz with discussions. The prince took up the loudspeaker again and announced, So now, we shall begin the production process immediately. With a single strike of the hammer, the work commenced. He watched with a mixture of excitement and fear, unsure whether the crown prince was truly as capable as they hoped. Above, something was suspended in place, ready to become a finished product. One worker heated a piece of copper in the fire to perfect its shape, while another worker below pulled the rope following the exact process the prince had outlined. The iron bar struck down with expert precision, and everyone there was astonished. Indeed, The production method was true to its name. They used tongs to retrieve the heated piece. And at last, the final product was revealed. A remarkably sturdy piece of armor. Witnessing this, his eyes lit up with amazement. This truly is a miraculous method. If we use this process, mass-producing armor will no longer be just a dream. As expected, this method was devised by the Crown Prince. He glanced down at his son with pride. But now, isn't this also the place where gunpowder is made? I'd like to take a look. The prince scratched his head awkwardly, hesitating. I'm terribly sorry, but we can't demonstrate that right now. The king didn't understand why the prince was so hesitant. So the prince calmly explained. Due to the complexity of the production process and the dangerous nature of the materials, we need to choose the right time to carry out the work. Hearing this, the king reluctantly accepted the explanation, while one of the officials by his side urged, Your Highness, please return to the palace to protect your health. Upon hearing this, the king's retinue was overjoyed. Eagerly, they said, All right, let's head back together. But this was not the end. I have seen the weapons in section 51. And they are truly excellent. What do you all think? One of the officials replied. I agree, Your Highness. Especially the cannons and firearms created by the Crown Prince. They are unmatched in power anywhere in the world. You all think so too? The king asked, nodding and stroking his chin thoughtfully. Then we shall produce these weapons in large quantities. What do you all think? The Crown Prince, sitting nearby, had anticipated his father's suggestion. This outcome was exactly as he had expected. Your Highness, one of the officials began. I must report that mass-producing these weapons will be very difficult. First, there is the issue of manpower. Among our craftsmen, there are very few with the necessary skills. Additionally, the supply of materials is proving to be a major challenge. Even the explosive materials we inspected today, the essential ingredients, pig fat and beef tallow, are in short supply and hard to procure in large quantities. He sat on the throne, considering the idea. As for the craftsmen, what if we recruit skilled workers from all over Joseon to supply the cannon components? Finally, the prince spoke up. Father, I'm afraid that this could lead to a high risk of leaking our secrets. This issue can be resolved if we restrict the components to the pre-processing stage before they are fully assembled. One of the officials added. Also, if we rely on tributes, the quality might not be guaranteed. The king raised his hand to signal. We will not accept tributes. Instead, we'll purchase what we need through the trading posts that are being set up. This will not only improve the lives of the people, but the craftsmen will also take their work more seriously. This is indeed a good plan. As for the issue of resources, the king began to scratch his head, thinking hard but saying nothing coherent, leaving everyone puzzled by his strange words. Late at night, while sleeping soundly in his bed, the Crown Prince suddenly woke up, exclaiming, That's it. I've got it. The next morning, General Hisan spotted the prince and called out to him. I've been waiting for you. Your Highness. The prince happily replied. General, it seems I've found a solution. Coincidentally, I also have an idea. The general said. Both had something to share and were eager to talk. You go first. General. The prince said. No. Your Highness. You should speak first. The two exchanged pleasantries, insisting the other go first, until the general seriously spoke up. What if we used soybean oil? The prince's eyes lit up upon hearing this. It was as if both had the same thought. A flash of inspiration connecting them. They clapped their hands in excitement. Let's test it right away. Our nation has long used various types of vegetable oils. Soybean oil is sufficient to make glycerin. Your Highness, may I conduct a test shot? General Hisan asked for permission. Go ahead. General. The prince replied. Watching the general's joy at receiving permission, the prince could see how eager and passionate he was. The general took the gun seriously. aimed at the target, and fired. A thunderous bang echoed, causing the prince to cover his ears. Looking at the places he had shot, the general reported, "With this efficiency, I believe it's ready. Your Highness, we should inform the king immediately." Both were pleased with their idea. And from inside the house, the king's voice echoed, "Is that true? That's indeed great news. So, we can start mass production now, right?" Standing below, the prince respectfully bowed and replied, "Yes, father. But there's still one important matter." Worry appeared on the prince's face, leaving the king puzzled about what his son wanted to report. "For this batch of soybeans, we used the crops from the fields managed by the livestock farm on Niabo Island. The reason is that the soybean meal left after extracting the oil is suitable as feed for cattle and pigs." The king stroked his chin thoughtfully and said, "But that quantity isn't enough to meet our needs." "That's correct, father. The fat, beef, and soybeans are also resources widely used by the people. If the court collects large quantities, it could make life harder for the common folk." The king nodded in agreement. "National defense is important, but we cannot ignore the lives of our people. I will think more about this matter." "You've worked hard, Crown Prince." "Thank you, father. I humbly take my leave." At the palace, after the crown prince left, the king sat there, deep in thought, unsure of the best solution. The prince, standing in the courtyard, felt anxious. He turned to see that the doors had closed at some point. Silently, he thought to himself, "Father, I believe you will find a good solution." At the court, the sky was clear and the sun was already at its peak. The officials and the king were in an urgent meeting. "The boy has suggested a plan to supply pressed oil," the king said. "Crown Prince, explain your plan to everyone." The prince nodded and responded, "Yes. The plan I propose is to use soybean oil." Everyone there was astonished by his words. "So, I will encourage farmers to migrate to the northern frontier to cultivate soybeans. And the court will purchase the entire harvest. In this way, the people's livelihoods will stabilize." The prince was surprised by his father's plan. This means that all the issues will be resolved, he thought. In addition, we will buy pork fat and beef tallow at reasonable prices, the king carefully instructed. And the officials replied, "We will comply with your orders, Your Highness." The prince looked up at his father with bright, admiring eyes. "Crown Prince, this time, you've made a great contribution." The king was immensely proud of the boy. "Thank you, father. It was all thanks to your guidance and the hard work of the people in Section 51. The king beamed with joy. This boy really understands the situation. Gripping his knees with determination, the king declared, "I will consider this the first step in strengthening the defense of Joseon. Therefore, proceed with utmost care. No mistakes can be made." The officials all responded in unison. "We will follow Your Highness' command." The prince thought to himself, "When it comes to the northern frontier, there's an old legend that says the name of the Tumun River means soybeans. This will be an excellent choice. If so, I'll also contribute my efforts to the northern frontier." Elsewhere, a soldier reported to General Hin Jin-gyo, "Some new settlers have arrived, requesting to work as farmers." "I see," the general replied. "Follow the usual procedures and find them a place to stay. This way. Follow me." That's why the crown prince granted the local generals golden pens. But the work didn't lessen. Instead, it only increased. Suddenly, a loud cry was heard. "Is there anyone who can write? Please, help me." The people were gathered, grilling ribs. "Hey! Hold the jar to catch the oil. Hurry! Be careful with the oil." This stove was a gift from the crown prince. Seeing everyone happily enjoying their ribs, one person asked, "Can the officials here really eat this kind of meat?" The man replied, "Right now. It's being supplied to the military first." But if you take good care of the soybean fields, you too will be able to eat like this. In return, when the time comes, you must carefully collect the oil and deliver it to the military workshop. Just like they do back at the royal palace. Papers were scattered messily on the shelves. Some pages had been blown open by the wind. The crown prince lay exhausted on the bed, sprawled out from one matter to another. It was all about the shortage of gunpowder. He lay there, one leg crossed over the other, deep in thought. Even if we exploit the northern lands, it still won't be enough, he murmured to himself. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Ah, that's right. What about the south? After the old officials left the court, power quickly shifted towards King Sejong. With the start of his reforms, King Sejong gradually implemented the policies he had long desired. Time passed, and on a summer day when Hyang was 10 years old, the king discussed with his officials. It's about time to find a husband for Princess Jongsu, don't you think? One of the officials replied. I believe this is a very suitable time. Your Highness. The crown prince turned, surprised by his father's words. What? Is Jongsu getting married? Well then, let's begin the search. As you command. Your Highness. In reality, Princess Jongsu had passed away in history. But now, she was about to get married. The feeling was truly strange. Father, I don't want this. Jongsu's voice broke in. I only want to live forever with you and the queen, she said, her eyes pleading for help. It's not that I don't understand, but there comes a time when marriage is a natural part of life. Doesn't it? Still, I just want to stay with the two of you for a little while longer, she said, her face wet with tears. Oh, this girl is so stubborn, the king said with a hint of reproach. Father, I hate you, she cried out and turned to run outside, ignoring her father's attempts to call her back. Earlier, the prince had a conversation with Jongsu about wanting her to marry, but she refused, running away while crying. Father, I hate you, the prince called out after her. Jongsu, the queen, sitting beside him, reassured him. Isn't she still young? I will try to comfort Jongsu. Please, don't worry too much. The prince, distressed, held his head inside. Raising children is truly not easy. The next day, while Jongsu was walking around, he noticed several palace maids hurrying about. Curious, he looked up and asked the eunuch. What are the palace maids so busy with this early? What's going on? The eunuch bowed deeply and whispered. Your Highness. It seems that the princess has been fasting since yesterday. He then presented a letter to Jongsu and added. Also, a maid from the princess requested I deliver this to you. Your Highness. Jongsu was startled. A letter from her? He opened the letter and read it. After finishing, he folded it back and said. Ah. Eunuch. I need to go on a secret patrol. Prepare as quickly as possible. The two eunuchs, surprised and confused, asked. A secret patrol. Your Highness. Jongsu winked and instructed. We need to do this without my father noticing. The more discreet and quick, the better. Hurry. The eunuchs immediately ran off, responding. Yes. Your Highness. Meanwhile, the prince asked about Jongsu's condition. I heard Jongsu refused to have breakfast today. Is that true? A eunuch respectfully replied. I'm sorry to report this, but yes, it is true. Your Highness. Upon hearing this, the prince sighed in frustration. Oh no. He sat down and asked. Has the queen said anything? The eunuch, nervously bowing, replied. She's still trying to persuade her. But Princess Jongsu is refusing to listen. The prince, stressed, held his head again inside. When one child settles down, the other starts causing trouble. At the princess's residence, Yeon casually waved his hand and said. Report already. 2 palace maids immediately bowed and said. Yes. Your Highness. We report that the Crown Prince has arrived. Jongsu's voice called from inside the room. Let him in. As Yeon entered the room, he dismissed the maids. Thank you for your efforts. The maids understood and bowed. Thank you. Your Highness. Before quickly leaving, Yeon sat down beside Jongsu, who was still hiding under her blanket. He sighed. You've been through so much already. Jongsu finally emerged from under the blanket, sitting up and adjusting her hair. She looked at him and asked about the matter in her letter. Did you bring what I asked for? Hurry and show me. Yeon took a packet of paper from inside his sleeve and sighed. Honestly. Do you know that I had to go on a secret patrol just to bring this back? I had to work hard to make sure father didn't find out. Jongsu took a piece of gangrone from the packet, lightly licking her lips, and asked. I know. But this gangrone is the one you bought from the store I asked. Right? Yeon, resting his chin on his hand in boredom, replied. Yes. That's right. But seriously. You should hurry up and find a suitor to marry. Otherwise, you'll be called an old maid soon. Hearing that, she immediately got angry, chewing the snack and pointing at him. Shut up. This is all because of you. Yeon looked confused. Huh? What does your marriage have to do with me? She crushed the gangrone in her hand, her whole body trembling with rage. Her face determined. Even if I get married. Before I do, I have to teach that idiot IU a proper lesson first. Then she sighed dramatically. My beloved gangrone. Seeing this, Yeon was at a loss for words. I have nothing more to say. I'll be going now. Please take care of your health. Sister. Don't worry. And thank you for the gangrone. She replied, still lost in her thoughts. Yeon, utterly confused, thought to himself. She's really thinking like that? As he left the princess's residence, walking with his hands behind his back, he mused. While I'm at it, I might as well go see that IU guy. I still have some gangrone left. At a small pavilion in the middle of the garden, 2 figures were seated. A tutor was chatting with Liu. When Yeong arrived, they were startled. Oh. Crown Prince. Yeon politely greeted them. Sorry for disturbing you. I was passing by and thought I'd stop in to say hello. The 2 individuals stood up and greeted him. Your Highness. Is your brother well? Yeon smiled warmly and replied. Yes. He's doing well. How's your studying going? Liu lowered his head and, in a tone that was clearly provoking, said. I'm working hard so I don't fall behind my brother. But you seem to have plenty of free time. Yeon smiled outwardly. But inside, he was fuming. Why is this guy being so stubborn? Before he could think more about it, Young-Su's words interrupted his thoughts. I need to talk to you. Lee responded rudely. Well, I'm talking to you right now. Aren't I? Young-Su crossed her arms, glaring at him. I heard you've been causing trouble and bothering the other palace maids. Is that true? Lee scoffed angrily. Aren't they just lowly servants? How dare they tattle on me to you? He turned, ready to leave. If you're done talking, I'll be going now. He kept speaking, unaware that Young-Su was trembling with anger. Finally, she exploded, her fury mirroring the prince's, shouting right in his face. You little brat. Is that how a prince with Sejong the Great's blood in his veins speaks? Shocked, Lee stumbled and fell to the ground. But Young-Su wasn't done. She continued, her words rapid and furious. Your brother, the crown prince, respects the artisans and servants. But you? You just called them lowly. I'll teach you a lesson so you never speak like that again. Terrified, Lee started crying. I'm sorry. Sister. I'm really sorry. Young-Su corrected him sharply. Your apology should go to the people you've hurt. Not to me. Lee nodded quickly. Still sobbing. I understand. I'll apologize to them. But less than 3 seconds later, Lee stood up again, arrogantly saying, even though my talented brother might have free time, I, the untalented one, am too busy catching up to him. So, unless this is really important. Furious inside, Young forced to smile, pretending to be the gentle older brother, and said, all right. I apologize. Keep focusing on your studies. As Lee went back inside the pavilion to study, Young clicked his tongue in frustration, thinking, I thought he had changed a little. But as soon as he heard that Sister Young-soo might get married, he started acting stubborn again. He tossed the bag of gangrone to the maids nearby, saying, you can have these snacks. The maids' eyes lit up with joy as they eagerly accepted the treat. Meanwhile, Lee, sitting inside the pavilion, wasn't focused on his studies at all. Instead, he wore a smug smile, scheming to himself. Just wait. Once Sister Young-soo gets married, this world will be mine. Time passed quickly, and the sun was already setting. The golden rays of the evening sun illuminated a corner of the royal palace. Inside the court, officials were arguing back and forth, none willing to yield to the other. The prince sat silently, his growing anger evident as his hands clenched tightly, veins bulging. Yet, the officials seemed oblivious, continuing their heated debate. The funds should be entrusted to Merchant Ion Khan. That's the best choice. No way. That's unreasonable. Song Sang is clearly the right choice. I believe Merchant Iju would be a better option. No. Merchant Dong Lo is definitely the best choice. The prince's face darkened with anger. Unable to hold it in any longer, he shouted, enough. Stop all of you. The officials were startled, quickly falling into silence. He stood up, his voice sharp and cutting as he scolded them. Are any of you listening and seriously thinking about what I've said? How many days has it been since I asked you to come up with a plan and prepare for this? Huh? I asked for countermeasures regarding the monopoly on candy sales. And all you've done is argue over which merchant is better, right in front of me. Are you ready to admit who bribed you and how much? Terrified, the officials immediately bowed their heads to the floor, pleading, Your Majesty, we deserve death. Please punish us. The prince glared at them. You want to die? Is that it? I'll consider your wish after I've reviewed this policy. They could only bow deeper, responding in unison. We will do our utmost. Your Majesty. Then the prince said something that made them break out into cold sweats. Especially the ministers. I trusted my judgment when I put you in these positions. Don't make me regret that trust. Now, thoroughly shaken, they all responded in chorus. We will remember your Majesty's teachings. We will carve them into our hearts. The prince, exasperated, sat back down and tried to calm himself. Let's move on to the next issue. The officials, still adjusting their clothing and looking dazed, muttered. The next issue. What is it? Seeing their confusion, the prince sighed in frustration, rubbing his temples and clicking his tongue. Unbelievable. Later that night, at the prince's residence, he sat with his chin resting on his hand, deep in thought. Why hasn't anyone thought of this before? If I've already laid everything out for them, what's the point of making them ministers and advisors? Is it because my standards are too high? Or have I overestimated their abilities? Must I entrust such important tasks to people who can't even match an 11-year-old? Meanwhile, at the residence of the left prime minister, he sat at his desk, looking worn out as he wrote a lengthy memorial to the throne. Suddenly, a voice came from outside. My lord, the right prime minister has arrived. Startled, he looked around for a moment before saying, invite him in. He adjusted his hat as the right prime minister entered. Ah, you've arrived, he greeted. The right prime minister sat down across from him. For a long while, neither said a word. Then, They both let out a heavy sigh. The right Prime Minister looked equally worn out, with dark circles under his eyes that were even darker than a panda's. There was no hiding how exhausted he was. Master Phuong Tan. The left Prime Minister greeted tiredly. We're both in the same boat. Master Cao Dai Fat. The right Prime Minister replied, as a servant brought tea into the room. The left Prime Minister waved them off. Forget the tea. Bring some wine instead. The right Prime Minister immediately declined. I came here today just to check on your health and chat a bit. No need for wine. If we get drunk and fall asleep here, that's one thing. But what will we do if we don't find a solution within the next 2 days? They both imagined the prince, furious, scolding them. Is this the best you can do? Why do you want to disappoint me? The thought alone made them shudder with fear. And they quickly dismissed the idea of drinking. Meanwhile, at the princess's residence, 2 eunuchs approached the courtyard. Inside, Jisoo was reading a book while snacking on gangdong. Suddenly, a trembling voice from one of the maids announced, Her Royal Highness, the princess, has arrived. Jisoo, confused, thought, at this hour, who? Then, in a moment of realization, she froze as she figured out who it was. The door opened, and she stammered, Why, Your Majesty? It's late now. Though. Quickly. She dove under her blanket, covering herself completely. The prince, seeing this, was worried. You've been fasting for 3 days. And I'm concerned about you. Jisoo. Are you all right? She turned around, still wrapped in the blanket, and performed a half bow. I greet my father. Your Majesty. She puffed her cheeks out in a cute, childlike manner. The sight of it melted the prince's heart, though he quickly regained his composure, clearing his throat. Suddenly, something caught his eye. Several bags of gangrong in the corner of the room. Smiling to himself, he thought, that boy. He's been sneaking around for 2 days because of his sister. Huh? Then, with a serious tone, the prince announced, First,